Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excelis Blue Cross Blue Shield, believing that everyone deserves to be cared for and to live well. Through community investments, partnerships, and education, Excelis Blue Cross Blue Shield is working to address health inequities. More at excelisbcbs.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Patrick Hosken, in for Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made in Hollywood, California in the mid-1960s. That's where Brian Wilson enlisted a cadre of professional musicians called the Wrecking Crew to help bring some new songs to life. He'd been exploring and felt himself move beyond the sunny and sandy tunes his group, the Beach Boys, had become known for. And the resulting album, Pet Sounds, is now celebrated as one of the best and most important albums of all time. Rolling Stone said it changed the course of popular music. And yet it may not even be Wilson's best-loved masterpiece. You got Smile, you got some of the later 70s output that I feel like people ride for. We'll get into it. But Brian Wilson died on June 11th at age 82. It felt like he had lived many lives, a pop staple, outsider artist, tragic figure, and then eventually a triumphant champion of music and musical joy. And his influence is so great now that even now, nearly 60 years after Pet Sounds, musicians still cite it as inspirational. And this is true right here in our local music community. This hour, we're joined by a group of local music makers who put Brian Wilson right up there. So thank you all for being here. We got Ben Morey is here. Hey, Ben.
Hey, Patrick. How you doing?
Ben, I'm doing well. Ben is a musician, a music educator, the founder of the Submarine School of Music. Also releases music with his band, The Eyes. And as I learned not that long ago, formed a Brian Wilson / Beach Boys tribute project over 10 years ago now.
Yeah, well, it lived and died 10 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, RIP to that, but it lives on in some recordings that I did hear, which sounded cool. Yeah. And one of the people on those recordings, right, was Alex Northrup, who's also here. So, hey, Alex.
Hi, Pat. I'm here.
Alex is a songwriter, producer, and engineer, and a frequent collaborator of Ben's. I feel like you guys often do stuff together.
Definitely.
Right?
Oh, yeah.
Alex's latest record is called Victory Laps. You can actually read a review of it in City Magazine and on rockcitymag.com. What I guess I should say, what was the song? Did you play on all those songs? Because I listed, there's about mostly songs from Pet Sounds, and then there was also Surfer Girl. Did you play on all those songs together?
On the recording of the show?
Yes.
Yeah, it was, so me, Ben, his now wife, Katie, we were kind of the core of that group. So we played on all of it. There were a few, who else was in it?
Joe Parker, Jessica Breen.
Yeah. So local folks who, when you told them the idea, they were like, yes, absolutely, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually my wife, Katie, came up to me at the Bug Jar right after I'd moved to Rochester, said I have this, we weren't even really friends yet. You know, we had met once before when our bands played a show together, and she came up to me and she's like, I have this idea to start a Beach Boys tribute band. And I said, oh, man, the Beach Boys are my favorite band. And so we started that. She had already had Alex enlisted, and then that's how we started hanging out. So, you know, if it wasn't for Brian, the Beach Boys, I probably wouldn't have my wife.
Whoa. Very cool. See, I should have added that as a tragic figure, all the other evidence, but also
matchmaker.
Matchmaker for sure. Yeah. And also, I'm so sorry to delay this, but Jacob Walsh is also here.
I got a lot of time.
Speaking of City Magazine, Jake is City's art director, but also a musician.
Yes.
And you made music with people in this room too, right? You guys have all made some music together?
I've played drums for both of these fellows. At certain points over the last 10 years, we've done some rocking.
Have you rocked to a Beach Boys song with them, though?
No.
It's a good question. We did some jamming up in my attic. A Beach Boys song might have made its way in there.
Possibly.
Probably.
Yeah.
Like just feeling each other out.
Yeah.
You know?
So is it going to be Beach Boys or Weezer? I'm getting more of a Weezer from you.
Is that how so your band is Big Nobody?
Yes.
Is that how is Weezer a sort of a touchstone? Also Beach Boys, Brian Wilson, or?
Totally.
Yeah.
I would say like somewhere in the middle of the midpoint of those two, less so with Big Nobody, but prior incarnations of this band are huge Beach Boys, Brian Wilson worshippers in the vocal arrangements and all of the instrumentation and all of that stuff.
So we're talking about California.
We were talking about California. Yeah. Me, born and raised in Rochester, New York. There is nothing I like the sunny Golden Coast of Southern California. That's where my fiance is from. It's from Tustin.
I'm sensing a little bit of a vibe now. We got something going on here that I didn't even know when I was putting this little conversation
Something about
together,
California
so.
girls, Patrick. I'm going to marry one.
And yeah, well, I was going to say you didn't marry, but California was a big part of the blossoming romance. So let me ask, I guess at the top of the hour, what are some aspects, some of the what's beloved about Brian's songwriting? Brian, you mentioned your favorite band, Beach Boys, Ben. What is it about that band? I mean, is it the vocal arrangements, as Jake is saying? Is it the vibe? Is it the musical exploration?
I think really it's that there's so much heart in the music that it genuinely moves you. Like it kind of like speaks to a part of your soul that you get like genuinely stirred by it. And then like it kind of like it pays off the more that you get into it. The harder you focus on it, the farther you look into it, the bigger returns you get from it, right? Like it hits you on that visceral level the first time you hear it, and then the more that you listen to it, it's just like, what are these sounds? He was combining like instruments that had never been combined before to make these new sounds that no one had ever heard. And then like, it seems like really simple sometimes on the surface and stuff. These melodies are like really kind of really pure and like direct, but then like, harmonically it's doing like all of these like weird changes and modulations and stuff that, you don't even realize that it's doing that until you try to learn to play it. And you're like, wow, this is really intricate and strange.
Yeah, there's like a famously, he was very influenced by Gershwin and Rhapsody in Blue and a lot of these sort of contemporary classical pop leaning, but American songbook kind of arrangements, and I feel like kind of made his own version of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you find that too? And as an educator, I mean, at Submarine School, there's a lot of Beach Boys. Do people want to learn those songs? Do you teach them? Are there people coming in being like, I want to learn how to play God Only Knows?
Listen, they're going to learn them whether they like it or not. Sometimes, definitely, yeah. I think, there's a lot of parents that send their kids to Submarine with like kind of like, I don't know, they pick up the vibe, I guess, that we're going for, and they're just like, all right, yeah, that's cool, let's send them there. But yeah, sometimes like the kids, I think the Beach Boys are still, hitting. I think, I think the younger generation is aware, like Beatles and Beach Boys and stuff like that. Having said that, I have gotten to be the person for a lot of kids to show them the Beatles or to show them the Beach Boys, which is an insane responsibility that I don't take lightly.
That's really so, and obviously it's a positive, reaction. Are there anybody who just straight up is like, absolutely not, I can't do this?
I'm sure there has been, but
those are the punks.
Blocked it out. Yeah.
Those are the burgeoning
Let's find
punks.
you a new teacher.
Let's find you a new school.
Get you on out of here. All right, there you go.
What is it? What about for you, Alex? I mean, you mentioned, or actually, I think I was reading. Both Ben and Alex wrote really lovely tributes to Brian Wilson after he passed. But I think it may have been something in that I read, but just about how there was so much in it that spoke to you in Brian's music, and especially Pet Sounds, that spoke to you.
I think he put so much of himself into the music. Probably intentionally, probably also unconsciously, that it just shines through. And you kind of feel like you kind of get to know the guy through his music. And he put a lot of heart into it. It all comes from a special place, but he also couldn't help that he just had this brilliant mind. So he's putting all this heart into it. It kind of hits you, and you're like, this sounds great. But then you keep listening, and you're like, wait, what did he just do there? Once you start thinking about it, there's a lot to really pick apart and work your own brain on it.
Yeah, it's interesting that he worked with outside lyricists too, because we talk about this like, such a piece of himself. But if he's conveying so much of it directly in the music alone, before you even talk about the lyrics, that he sort of collaborated with Van Dyke Parks, with Tony Asher, a lot of these other folks with it, like that does say a lot, that you can get that just from a lot of the musicality too.
He might have been a guy who just couldn't find the words, but he could definitely go to his piano and play it, and you'd be like, okay, I get it. And I kind of get that too. I've always struggled with lyrics, and it's nice when someone else writes the lyrics and you can just make the music.
That's maybe like one of his great skills too, is like, identifying his own shortcomings and kind of like having an eye for the exact right person that like could complement that at the exact right moment in his artistic journey, because Tony Asher is the perfect lyricist for Pet Sounds, and then Van Dyke Parks is the perfect lyricist for Smile, but they could not be more different.
Right. And Mike Love was the perfect lyricist for the early stuff, but he couldn't have pulled off Pet Sounds or Smile.
Right.
He found the right people for the right songs. And he always, I feel like for a long time there was a narrative that Brian Wilson's the genius behind the Beach Boys. None of the rest of them matter, but he had all those great voices at his disposal, and he knew when to use Mike on this part, or use Al on this part. And you don't even notice sometimes. It just blends into this huge whole.
Yeah.
But he knew when to use them at the right time. And then with the Wrecking Crew, too.
Right.
He was like, oh, I can get these players in to bring in all these different sounds. So I think collaboration is a key part of his sound that maybe doesn't get mentioned as much.
Definitely. He's like master collaborator for sure.
Yeah.
Right after
He's the ringleader of it all. He's at the center of it.
For sure.
But
right after he passed, like the way that I kind of mourned him was just listening to the Smile outtakes, where it's 16 hours of him, like it'll be like 30 seconds of like Cabinescence, and then him like just stop, and like, just, like Hal, I want you to play this, and like kind of like just singing all the parts to all the musicians, and to kind of experience all of those songs come together because of how he's able to communicate music to others.
Jake, as a drummer, you've probably been subjected to, probably even me, being like, no, play the drums like ba-da, 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 instead of ba-da, ba-da, ba-da.
My favorite thing about this type of musician and songwriter is that I've had so much experience on like both sides of it. Like I have very much been like a drummer in service to other people's projects where they are like writing and arranging everything. But then also being on the songwriting side, I am not always very good with words or communicating things, especially as it pertains to like music, in very frank, plain terms. I feel like I always get stressed out when I'm in the driver's seat, and the people that I work with also I'm very lucky to have as like very close friends. So you can kind of do that thing where you're not so much saying like, can you play the drums? Like, can you accent the 2 and the 4 or whatever a little bit more or whatever? You can kind of just be like, no, it has to be like, blah, 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 like you do your little, your gibberish thing, and you're close with the people that you're making music with. And there's a lot of like frantic gesturing, and it's also very frustrating to be on, for me at least, I'll speak for myself. It's really hard to be on the end of, I need to tell everybody how this sounds in my head, because it's like all in there, and I can't like do it, and I need you guys to do it. And I'm very lucky to find myself in circumstances both on the giving and receiving end where like everyone's down to just like, we got it, we get what you're saying. Weird but good.
And we were talking about the film Love and Mercy not that long ago after he passed, Jake. And it's Paul Dano plays sort of like Pet Sounds, Smile era. Brian Wilson, John Cusack plays later, late 80s, maybe early 90s version as well. But there's great, to your point, Ben, about the Smile outtakes, there's some great scenes in that movie where he's essentially running around the studio doing exactly that, kind of acting out all of these kind of wild gestures, and it's kind of like cut in a montage, so you can really kind of get the frantic nature of it, which gives you, I feel like, a really good insight into that.
Definitely, yeah. And that movie is so great too. It's like kind of one of the very few music biopics that I thought nailed it.
Nails it completely. We went and saw it on Saturday.
Yeah. Did you saw it again?
Oh wow,
it still holds up.
It's so good. It's
gets
awesome.
Everything right that a music biopic should.
I'm realizing
I don't bother with any of them anymore.
Yeah.
The Dylan one was fine.
That's a different show.
But
yeah, it's an episode of I Love Films. I do think, but I agree though. I think that there's a certain care that was like dedicated to, okay, let's like because I feel like Brian Wilson's life in general had been so dissected as well. Like it's like one of the very most famous examples of like kind of a peak career breakdown. You know, he struggled with mental health and sort of was eventually in a very toxic situation with a alleged caregiver. So to kind of divorce or like to feel like you don't have to live up to the expectations, you don't have to establish a narrative that's already been well established. You can kind of have some fun, you know, take some narrative, have some fun with the narrative and kind of do all that stuff. So I agree. And in fact, I think that's very to the essence of a lot of the playfulness and kind of the, you know, what goes along with it, which I also think comes from, I mean, there's a lot of talk about sort of like teenagerdom when you talk about the music. I think, Ben, in your tribute, you were talking about discovering Pet Sounds when you were a teenager. Alex, I think you did as well. Does that kind of go hand in hand with like, I'm developing my own certainly abilities as a musician, but also my ways of thinking as a musician? And so like hearing somebody else do it to this caliber is also really inspiring. Is that why like Pet Sounds hits as a teen, perhaps?
Definitely. I think it hits you kind of at any age through the lens of being a teenager, though. That I think he wrote it when he was 23, but he wrote it, you know, kind of from the perspective of teenagers a lot of the time. Like songs like Wouldn't It Be Nice If We Were Older and stuff like that, you know? Like, I think that's the time where you're falling in love for the first time, and those feelings are kind of like the most, you know, like potent and like unbearable than at any other time in your life. And if he can kind of put his listeners back in that headspace when they're listening to these songs, and then you know get even more emotional when you hear them. So I think that was a purposeful kind of thing, but also probably like a lot of the music that he loved, you know, like the Phil Spector stuff, like Be My Baby was kind of speaking to that same audience. And Phil Spector was doing it because that's who bought records. Yeah. You know, he was like trying to sell it to teenagers, but I think Brian Wilson tapped into it because he just thought it would be more moving.
Yeah.
I think he still had a sense for what was commercial too.
Sure.
You know, he knew what his audience was, but at the same time, he was trying to push boundaries, break some new ground. As far as how it hit me, I think it wasn't so much like the first love and stuff as a teenager, but just all the confusion and craziness that you have to deal with at that age. I think more than anything, it really speaks to that. Just trying to navigate your way through teenagerdom.
Yeah, for sure. In all its confusing sort of glory.
Oh, yeah.
Well, and I
wouldn't want to go back there.
No, couldn't pay me. Ben, you mentioned finding a copy of Pet Sounds at a yard sale when you were 16. Yeah. Alex, I think you said everything I do goes back to those 13 songs. It felt like you and Brian were kindred spirits. Mm-hmm. So I think, there's definitely a theme in how the music can hit and kind of can channel or maybe give you language for something that maybe you're just kind of experiencing and you don't have it for yet. In terms of then translating, or I guess I should say, Jake, was it similar for you? Was it Pet Sounds? I mean, because that's just one of many entry points, I think, for people.
That's very true. I got into the Beach Boys when I was kind of in my early 20s. I think when I started writing music in earnest, I was just sort of like looking for any sort of North Star, and I was like looking towards people I trusted to see who their North Star was, and it's like always the Beach Boys, and it's always that specific album. It was my early 20s for sure, and that's a very potent time in anybody's life. And I wrote down a couple of things here, and one of the notes is music to lick your wounds to. That's a wound licking album for sure, especially if you're kind of a softie in your early 20s, someone who's prone to self-flagellation and self-doubt, all that sort of stuff. You'll find a bottomless well to jump into if you listen to Pet Sounds enough times. Yeah. It's crazy.
It's a comfort food for sure. It's kind of like, when you I don't know, like when I'm sick or something, like I'll put on a show that I've seen a million times, just so that I don't have to think about something, but I can feel like kind of embraced,
totally.
A little bit,
Yeah, I see that. And I think that there's certainly like it's not as if like certainly the band didn't begin and Brian's abilities didn't begin with Pet Sounds. We're just talking about that because that's kind of like the most heralded, I think. Sure. But there's obviously a whole career of really great songs, and even what kind of gets, I guess, if you compare it to Pet Sounds or what came later, what gets slightly marginalized in terms of being like a very sunshiny kind of pop-centric thing about California and surfing and beaches. But to that point, we got an email from Charlie in Pittsford who says, I'm of an age where I remember AM radio before the Beatles. Although I was a little, I had an older brother who was already buying records. His favorite Beach Boys LP was Surfer Girl with its haunting title tune and the introspective In My Room. Those two tunes are a part of my DNA, and whenever I hear them, I still get chills and warm memories of growing up in a beach town. Of course, as a working musician, I love Pet Sounds, a masterpiece. Rest in peace, Brian Wilson, a true genius. Yeah, so I think that there's a lot, and Surfer Girl was the first song on that cover album,
That's
by
right.
the way. So,
and it's, I think, the first song that Brian wrote, right? He heard Beautiful Dreamer on the radio, and then he tried to match it. Like, he went inside and wrote Surfer Girl as his attempt to, match Stephen Foster.
Those are great stories, right? Like, there's one about Kurt Cobain staying up all night listening to Meet the Beatles, and then he writes about a girl. It's just like, those are nice little like stories that that I probably first heard like from David Frick or something as a talking head on VH1. But I'm like, well, I remember that at a certain point. So similar to that, I would love to hear about as music makers. Are any / all of you trying, I guess, consciously to not recreate, but trying to channel something, hearing an idea that you like in a Beach Boys song, and then trying to do your own version of it? Like, how much you mentioned, Jake, the vocal harmonies obviously being a big part of it.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of where a lot of people would start, maybe.
Yeah, totally. There are so many songs that, because my band is a pretty straightforward, like, heavy rock band, but a very melodic pop grounded heavy guitar band, and in all of the studio sessions that we did, there's like 4 vocal tracks on every song, even if they're not always used. It's something that myself and the producer for these records, Dave Drago, are both very in love with. Like, I have a note here. I didn't know what I was going to say about Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys, but I wrote down that harmony is like my favorite thing about music. I think there are many things to love about music, and harmony is the one that, to me, comes the most naturally. I feel like if you do it enough, you kind of get this sense for like, oh, okay, I can like sing this harmony, and then I can just run 3 tracks above it, and that feels so good to harmonize with yourself, but more so with like other people. Yeah. I remember like when Alex and I played in the John Lewis band, there would be like Dave and John and I would like take any excuse we could to sing 3-part harmonies, because we felt so comfortable together doing that. And I'm like getting goosebumps thinking about it. I love multiple part vocal harmonies. So you'll find a lot of that sort of stuff, even in places where it straight up does not belong. Like there are songs that are, kind of thrashy and heavy and distorted, and then you'll hear like a 4 freshman like like ooze coming in over very like fuzzy guitars. But I love juxtaposing stuff like that, and there always has to be sort of like a heart of sweetness for me, I think, and vocal harmonies really do that.
Yeah.
Well,
actually, this might be a good time, because I'd love to hear more about that from you both, Ben and Alex. But maybe we can play a clip from Big Nobody's song "Quiet." Right, this is the last song on your record, "Ripped from the Dream."
Ripped from the Dream.
Like being undercover, like being alone. But you don't have a choice. You will drown in something bigger than you. You make the move, justify the time to get away.
So I hear some jangle for sure, but
Jangled
I also
up.
It feels like a nice mellow vibe. But and honestly, this part is kind of like a little wave. Like we're talking about a wave. But I hear the vocal harmonies for sure. That's a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
See, I would say they do belong there, probably.
I did a terrible job of setting up the clip that I sent you this morning, because I was like, it's really aggressive, like, rhythmic, fuzzy guitar music, and then I sent like the softest song we've ever had in our set before. But yeah, also things change. Collaboration is important, and that album, I was very much like kind of left to my own devices for arranging that one. Like, that album is a Big Nobody album, but I did all the recording by myself. Like, I did all the instruments and all the vocal stacks. So it was me and Dave working on that one. And since then, that ear towards harmony has not gone away, but I've got like 3 other people in the room with me who are more and more we are working on these songs together, and there's like a much more present spirit of collaboration between the 4 of us. And so that sort of jangled out like harmony heavy stuff, there's still a place for it, but we are all kind of pushing collectively in a different direction, but there's still room for harmony.
So you're not in the same Brian Wilson role of trying to do everything in your head.
I've got my best friends in the world that I can lean on and whose tastes I trust, and who have very different tastes too. They all are incredible like writers, arrangers, and people, and it's baffling to kind of have all of them. Connor, JT, and Kyle are the other 3 people. I want to name them because I'm talking about
Let's
them.
name them. Yeah,
they all have bands, projects, and aspirations of their own. And when we're together as Big Nobody, we all benefit from all of us kind of having different interests, different tastes, and all of that stuff. It's cool.
And so the harmonies, you're singing with yourself on that song, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You're not singing with your 2 brothers and your cousin and your friend.
Not
right?
yet.
Like the Beach Boys.
I could not imagine doing that.
What about for you, Ben? I mean, is it, do you hear something in a song and in a Beach Boys song, or I guess maybe there's an idea that you like? Because, and even saying that, like there's, you could, it depends on the song, right? Because you're talking about a theremin in certain circumstances. Yeah. You're talking about all sorts of different instrumentation.
I think that definitely happens, and that there's so many kind of aspects to be inspired by in Beach Boys music. Like there's that collaborative aspect that we're talking about, like trying to get like really cool ideas out of other people's brains and try to orchestrate that, or trying to communicate your own ideas to somebody with more prowess on an instrument or something like that, or like trying to combine instruments in a way that you've never heard before. I think that's something I take from Brian a lot, is trying to come up with unique sounds. I think trying to move chord progressions in sort of an unexpected but smooth way is something that I try to do a lot, and that's from Brian. Trying to use like the recording studio as an instrument itself, like trying to get like a bunch of people in one room and like kind of like mic it from the the walls or something like that, and trying to get like this big wall of sound that Brian loved to do. And then, harmony is absolutely, I think harmony is like instantly elevate a song,
That's good. Also, example of what that means, because I hear that expression a lot, using the studio as an instrument, and I just never, as someone who does not record music really, I've always was like, what does that actually look like? Yeah. So you're talking about putting up mics. Is it more about like just seeing what the room can do? Yeah.
So different rooms obviously have like different vibes. Like if you record in church, it's going to sound, like really big and reverby and spacious. And then if you record like in a bathroom, it's going to be really reflective and small. And sometimes, that's the thing you want. And sometimes it's that church sound, or like, every studio is different. Like they can be made out of wood or the tile floors or what have you, but Brian really, he like had, what's kind of cool is that as a 23-year-old, he had like, just this incredible string of successes and like an unlimited budget to do whatever he wanted.
Yeah, that's true. That's another very key aspect.
Yeah,
of this.
yeah.
We must
no one in this room can really recreate with the major label recording budgets.
Yeah,
that would be great.
And some of the greatest recording studios that ever existed.
Yeah, and the greatest musicians. So he like a song like Good Vibrations, that was recorded in like 6 different studios, like, and every single like section of that song is spliced together from takes from different studios on different days.
Right, and another way you can play the studio as an instrument is not even just the room itself, but from the technical side, you can start cutting things together. Like on the other side of the glass there, you can start running things through different echo chambers, tape echoes. That was really all that was available to them at the time. So they had to be really inventive about what they did, but that's another playing the studio as an instrument. And the Beatles were doing the same thing across the pond. Think Strawberry Fields is kind of their version of Good Vibrations. They were doing the same thing there. It was cut together from totally different recordings they did. They sped the tape up. They slowed it down. That's playing the studio.
Yeah.
You're just going to a knob and just kind of turning it to change the pitch.
Okay.
Like going to your amp and be like, well, let's see how it sounds if we do that. We turn that knob.
Sure. We have an email from Michael in Rochester. He says, when I was a child, I didn't have a lot of money. I used to maximize what little I had by waiting until one of my favorite groups came out with a greatest hits record. The first Beach Boys' greatest hits was one of my all-time favorite records. I played it so many times that the hole in the middle of the record got so big that it would not play anymore. I just made a playlist of my top 20 and in my room made the list. Hearing the song takes me back to my childhood and bedroom in Charlotte where I always felt safe and secure. Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think that it's all there, right? Like the entry point being whatever it is, the kind of love and you're literally wearing out a physical disc, and then also kind of the memories for that. So yeah, that's great. Well, we have to take a quick break. It's going to be our only break of the hour. We've been talking to Ben Morey and Alex Northrup and Jake Walsh about Brian Wilson. When we come back, we will talk more about that, and we'll also hear a little bit more music.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, proud supporter of Connections with Evan Dawson, believing an informed and engaged community is a connected one. marycariola.org.
All right, this is Connections. We are talking about Brian Wilson with Ben Morey, with Alex Northrup and Jake Walsh. We heard a little bit from Jake's band before the break, Big Nobody. The song is called Quiet, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that people knew where to find it.
It kind of does tie in to that last email. It's a song about kind of trying to be alone and like be away from everything and find quiet, find like peace within yourself. I know we're trying to come back, but it did occur to me like, wow, some connections.
Yeah, my
Connections.
Yeah.
The song that I sent you for today is also about that. Yes. Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme. And let me read one of my notes. Music for introverts, dreamers, softies, and romantics.
That was the subtitle of this episode.
Let's assemble the crew.
Well, actually, yeah, so can you talk a little bit about the song? Maybe we can set it up, Ben.
Yeah.
So yours is...
It's called Tears in My Ears. It's I would say it's influences, I think Brian kind of has touched all the music that I've ever made in some way, but I this one is definitely kind of a in my room type song. It's definitely from the point of view of like a teenager that's going through has gone like through a breakup and they're just like listening to music by themselves in their room, and then a song comes on that reminds them.
Yeah. All right, well, let's hear a little bit. This is Ben Morey, Tears in My Ears.
I get tears in my ears when I'm up laying in my bed and your sweet memory creeps in my bed. Get tears in my ears when I'm up late and all alone.
Okay, so we heard the lyrical stuff. Did you say Alex is playing organ on this?
Yeah, he's going to come in on the second verse there.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So yes, I definitely can sense that already. A little bit of little melancholy, but sounds upbeat, riding that wave, which is nice. When's that song from? How old is that one?
That one came out in 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on an album called Still Life.
Now, have you all found... and it's sort of like you mentioned this earlier, Ben, when you were talking about sort of being the entry point, or being the person who allows a lot of your students to have this entry point with the Beatles or the Beach Boys or whoever. A lot of these acts who like you're almost assumed to have just the knowledge of, right? But obviously everybody does have an entry point. Is it a given when you talk to other musicians here? I mean, you've all been here in Rochester making music for a long time. Is that like a common core Brian Wilson, Beach Boy stuff, or is it almost just like a given in the same way that like maybe a Bob Dylan or Beatles or something would be? I mean, do you really bond? I mean, the Pet Sounds cover thing, it sounds like a really good example of a bunch of really dedicated people bringing that to life. But did you find that that's like emblematic of community? Not
always. I think that like whether a person likes the Beach Boys or not is a good litmus test for me. Like when I'm like going to see if I'm going to bond with another musician or if we're going to have that common ground, because to like the Beach Boys, I guess you have to, you got to put a little bit into it. You got to dig a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there's a ton of people that just think of the Beach Boys as like the radio hits and like the surf songs and the car songs and stuff like that. Pet Sounds lovers are a totally different camp of like Beach Boys fandom. It's like the Mike Love people or the Brian people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm just remembering that the person who like showed me that era of the Beach Boys was Connor Benincasa, who plays drums in my band and who has a great band of his own called Comfy. We were on tour together and we were like driving through Boston and he played the Smile Sessions, and that was like he was very much, I think, on a mission, maybe not on a mission so directly, but we were in the car for hours and he was like, I'm gonna show everybody this, and he did, and that was like the beginning of that.
And that's one of the most fun things if you're in that era of your life where you're just with a bunch of open-minded people and you get to show them all the cool stuff that you like and to see the enthusiasm that kind of comes from that.
Oh, that's the best.
It was very cool.
And I could see how that would lend itself a lot to musical collaboration. We have an interesting message here. This is an email from William. He asks, to what extent do you think the environment around LA where Brian Wilson lived contributed to his musical genius? I'm interested since I grew up 1 mile north of the Wilson brothers. And we should say, Brian Wilson was in the band with his brothers Carl and Dennis. Their cousin was Mike Love, and then their friend Al Jardine was also in the band. And they're all although Al Jardine, born here in Rochester before he moved out to SoCal.
That's so crazy.
Got to shout it out. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't. Do you all have any thoughts on that question?
We took a trip to LA last year, and we did a thing where we were like, we ended up renting a convertible, and we were like, let's just find like all these classic LA records and just listen to them while we're driving around. And it eventually got to the Beach Boys, and we were like, this just sounds like what we're seeing.
Yes.
Yeah. I think all of them, they somehow tapped into that sensibility and that environment and translated it into music. That the California Myth, they sold that through their music. So people around the world would hear it, be like, oh, that's what California's like. And I think if you go there and you listen to it, you would be like, oh yeah, it just feels like it's in the air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first
it
time
was a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
For sure.
That's cool.
Smart to do. What a cool idea.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Right, like, how do I put the lay the foundation for a guaranteed cool experience? I guess it's to rent a convertible and listen to these really great albums in LA.
Yeah.
What were you going to say something about that, Jake? I was just
going to say my first time out in Los Angeles, I remember like being in LA and being overcome with a feeling of like, this is like the Beach Boys. Like it's hard to explain it, but it's like things are incredibly different on the West Coast, and everything is very spread out. You are there's a huge car culture, for better or for worse, and there's just so much space and so much to like take in visually, and you do kind of, if you're driving down the road or driving down the coast or whatever, you feel very much like a liquidity, like a feeling of like soaring, not to romanticize driving too much, but like, I don't know.
That's kind of what rock and roll is all about, right? There's
you got that right.
About cars, Bruce Springsteen, speaking of biopics, I think the first scene in the trailer is him sitting in the car.
You don't say.
But yeah, I mean, there's I've been thinking about this also because of where we live. Like, we just see so little sun, with the exception of the past week or so. We see so little of it that I wonder if there's any particular attraction to the Beach Boys or something like that, because it's a bit escapist.
It's an escape for sure. Yeah. Also, we are a beach town too, so
that's all. I'm at the
some
beach
of my
all the time.
Yeah, no,
Shout out to Duran Eastman Beach.
Shouts
some
out.
of my early memories of the Beach Boys are listening to them at the beach.
Yeah.
So that's another way I feel connected to it. Of course, the Christmas album is great for the 8 dark months of the year.
Yeah,
that we have here.
It's one or the other, though.
That's true, though. Their name, I mean, they're not called like the Pacific Beach Boys. It's the Beach Boys.
It
like
can
any
be any
beach will
beach.
do.
The West Coast Beach Boys. Yeah, no.
Minnesota, land of lakes.
Yeah,
there's beaches too.
You can do that
the Beach
too.
Boys.
They're America's band. They're for all of us.
Coney Island.
There you go.
Yeah.
So there's one more track that we should play. This is your song, Alex. This is called "We Were the Stars." This is from your new record, right? Victory Laps.
Mm-hmm.
And did you want to? How would you set this up?
Gee, I don't know. I was asked to pick a song, and I couldn't think of one where it was like explicitly like, oh yeah, this is my Beach Boys song, just because I think it's just so ingrained in my DNA,
Sure.
my musical DNA at this point. That it never comes out explicitly Beach Boys, but it's just always there. It's always filtered through my own sensibility. But I was thinking about this one, and there's vocal harmonies on it for sure. Ben's wife and my friend Katie is one of the main vocalists on it, and we layered a whole bunch of tracks. And part of the reason I had her in there because I just wanted to use different voices, so checks that box. I feel like this one's kind of catchy and accessible, but then around the bridge, the chords start to go off the rails, and it gets into some weird modulations. So there's that. Definitely some studio as instrument in it. There's some weird tape effects late in the song too. So
very cool.
And I did not write the lyrics to this one. This was a collaboration with our friend Clem Coleman from Syracuse.
So in a lot of ways, it checks a lot of Brian Wilson.
Yeah.
boxes there. Yeah.
That was the last one. Oh yeah, I didn't write the lyrics to this one either, so that's great.
Cool.
So yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is Alex Northrup. This song's called "We Were the Stars."
I crawl through the crowd now that you're gone. Don't care for these devils, but of me they are fun. You swam in the fountains and just scaled every peak. But the trouble was mounting, 'cause he could not speak.
Now I loved. What was the second instrument we heard after the acoustic guitar and the vocals? What was that came in?
It's a tack piano, which is a regular piano with tacks in the hammers, so it makes kind of a metallic, clangy sound when you play it. Fed through a Buchla synthesizer.
Wow.
That my partner Sam Hirsch built. And so I went in we call it Studio B, which is the little room, and I played the tack piano, and he was in the other room manipulating the sound live, and it gets a little goofier as it goes on too.
Sure, yeah.
But we thought it was a cool sound. So.
Alex Northrup's song "We Were the Stars." Yeah, I mean not dissimilar to the was it the hair clips in the piano for
That's kind of the sound, that
Yeah.
metallic sound.
Yes.
And
Still
I
Believe in
think
Me.
they
You Still
had
Thank you. Yeah.
they definitely had tack pianos on Pet Sounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, I mean, and that's to your earlier point, Ben, about unusual instruments, or maybe I think you said instruments that you wouldn't necessarily put together. That's something that really draws you in.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, like Good Vibrations, I think part of its popularity is just that he's using like a theremin and a cello and, all these really like these instruments that you don't hear in pop songs ever. That was maybe the first use of theremin in a pop song. Well, except for the ones he did it before.
First.
Yeah.
Before that.
That's right. Yeah.
What an innovator.
I do love that, like, I think that so much of the reason that all these sounds exist on the albums is because, like, they were very, very successful. And at a certain point, you're just like, well, I got all this stuff. I got to use all this stuff.
Yeah.
Like, I'm in the studio. I got all these people. I have a huge budget. Like, why not be weird and try, like, a bunch of strange stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
it's
like
cool.
stories about him, like, having to call up like a place because it's LA, because they have everything for movies and stuff. There are like warehouses that just collect kind of strange stuff, and there's one that specialized in instruments. So he just like call them up and be like, "Do you have like a pump organ there?
Yeah.
Can you bring it here in 10 minutes?"
Yeah.
You can hear it on the progression on the early albums too. Like they start off as just a basic garage band, pretty much 2 guitars, bass, drums. Even as far back as the first album, you get an organ solo, and okay, that kind of breaks it up a bit. And by Surfer Girl, you get. Do they have Catch a Wave on that one? They do. It's now there's a harp. It's like, okay, there's one little bit. And then as the albums go on, you get more and more random little instruments in there until like 1965 with Beach Boys Today. Now he's bringing in timpanis. There's harpsichords. There's bass harmonicas regularly. On every song has at least a couple weird instruments. And it just kind of blew up from there.
Yeah. So as you're
As they
listening,
had the success and the money to be like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we can bring in these these players that cost a lot of money per hour.
Right. Yeah, you can hear that progression through the discography. Well, this is good because we had an email from Michael in Rochester asking, what records after Pet Sounds would you all recommend? So this is a good one. I had this question too, and I'd love to throw that out to whoever.
Well, obviously Smile, which, was the most famous unreleased album and most bootlegged album until it was finally released in 2011. The Smile Sessions.
Yeah.
Like that's probably my favorite album. That's like period.
Do you like the 2004 Brian Wilson Presents Smile as well?
Definitely, and I think that kind of was an entry point for me to Brian as an artist too. Like I got Pet Sounds and I loved that album, but then it was like right after that they put out Brian Wilson Presents Smile with the documentary Beautiful Dreamer, which told like the whole story of Brian. And that's kind of was my introduction to him as an artist, and it's also probably the reason that like I wanted to become like a recording engineer and like spend time in recording studios was because of that. So I mean, Smile, yeah, you gotta listen to that.
Totally.
It's the best.
Okay, what about you, Alex? What are you thinking?
Smiley Smile, the album that came out in its place. I get it. It's not Smile, but my God, it's weird as heck. There's nothing else like it, and I thought I wouldn't like it when I first heard it, but just something about the weirdness really drew me in. It's super minimal, so it pulls back from the orchestra in a tiny room sound of Pet Sounds to maybe a piano and a bunch of substance-influenced vocalizing over it.
Sure.
Real minimal stuff. That's one of my favorites. And Friends, which came in early. Was it? Today was the release date. 1968.
Anniversary. Okay,
Yeah,
very cool.
music anniversary. There
Yeah.
we go.
Okay.
And that's when they kind of get back into more sounds than
Friends is great.
I love Friends.
What about you, Jake?
I remember really loving Wild Honey. I was into that for a while, and I actually don't know if Brian is on Wild Honey or Surf's Up, but those are the two.
He's on both.
He's on
Yeah.
both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Surf's Up.
Not
my
as much
memory
on
is not
Surf's
serving
Up.
me, but yeah.
Well,
those
he
are-
was
those
sort
are-
of like in and out of the picture, I feel like, at that point, right? Like,
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
I have to admit too, I didn't spend too much time with those albums because I really do love the early Beach Boys stuff. That's also very influential to me, and then right up to Pet Sounds. That's kind of I think that's kind of the story for a lot of people. I may fall into that stereotype of like I really love the early stuff. I really love Pet Sounds. I must cop to falling off afterwards, but I know that I've at least listened to the whole catalog,
Sure.
or the proper catalog. But yeah, I think those are the two that kind of stuck around in my head, outside of Pet Sounds and the early stuff.
Are you all familiar with the shortening bread situation? This is kind of a meme at this point. So this might be for the
I don't think so.
this slightly perennially online folks, but. Okay, Ben, could you explain this a little bit?
Yeah, it's like Brian was just obsessed with shortening bread. Like at different periods in his life, he's said that it's his, he thinks it's the most brilliant song ever written, and trying to get people around him to sing it with him at like parties and stuff.
Which is
like
the tune that goes, "Mama's little baby loves shortening."
Yeah, yeah.
shortening. Mama's little baby loves shortening.
There's
bread.
a Beach Boys recording of it.
Yeah.
Right.
From was it for Adult Child?
Oh yeah.
The weird unreleased late '70s album.
So there's a lot of lore. There's a lot of sort of, yeah.
There's a
and-
funny story about like him trying to get Iggy Pop to sing it, and which leads to Iggy Pop like leaving his house saying that guy's crazy.
right, and so it's kind of become a meme, like, and to the point where I don't know when I became aware of this, but yeah, there's a great. On the Wikipedia page for the song "Shortening Bread," there's a whole Beach Boys section that's just devoted to stories like that Iggy Pop thing. There's one about him calling up Alex Chilton from Big Star, being like, "You have to sing this song. You have the perfect voice for it." And it's like the middle of the night, and he's like, "Oh okay." But there's a lot of there's a lot of the stories, and it's sort of become a meme, and like to the point where even when after I learned that Brian had passed away, I went on to there's like a 7-minute version of it from the 70s that is unbelievable. I mean, it is really, really out there, but it really rips, and it sounds like very of the era and indulgent in many ways, including in substances perhaps. But everybody in the comments was like, real heads are here, R.I.P. Ryan. Brian. And it was like that's where they went like, oh my God, Brian Wilson died. Let's listen to Shortened Bread.
Wow.
So I have to say, Jake, if you got to check this out.
I should, and I will. That's a promise.
And Ding Dang.
And Ding Dang.
Yeah.
Which is just fun to say. Good, clean fun.
And
I believe.
Smart Girls.
Which he said is his favorite song that he ever wrote.
Which is like a 50-second song.
Yeah, that he co-wrote with Roger McGuinn
Okay.
of the Birds.
Of the Birds,
Huh.
yeah.
No
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah.
So there's and I honestly think that this is why it's very it becomes so much more fun to be like an active fan in this era
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's like you have so much more than just the records now, you know?
Yeah.
All
So-
the lore is accessible now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's
And there's
it's
a lot
good
of
to be a
lore.
Beach
Yeah.
Boys fan.
Yeah.
It's a fun community that you can.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's a lot
make friends through and
It's true.
everything. It's great.
And there's so much to your point earlier, Ben. There's so much unreleased stuff in the vault. I mean, much of it has been released at this point, but there's a lot of fan track lists for Smile. Is this the one that Brian wanted? Like,
Right.
how can we play with it? So it's
Endless debate.
It's a very active
Yeah.
sort of community, which I think for music fans and music obsessive, I feel feels like it makes sense why it's this Pet Sounds is going to be 60 years old next year, but it doesn't matter. It seems like because it kind of stays.
Just as fresh.
Yeah, it feels it's kind of funny. Like the Beach Boys are probably one of the most famous and successful bands of all time. Yet, like being a Beach Boys like super fan, like it kind of makes you feel like you're part of this like special underground club that
That
Yeah.
is-
like,
there's
no one knows that I know that I know about Big Bang.
that is true. I wonder what it is about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say I appreciate the perspective from all three of you, and highly recommend to our listener who asked about albums. I think all of those are great, but also we have to add the song "Shortened Bread" in there as well.
Yeah.
And "Love You." That album "Love You" is also really
Oh, yeah.
cool.
Oh,
So,
it's very cool.
Cool. Well, I have to thank my guests, Ben Morey, co-founder of the Submarine School of Music and recording engineer and songwriter, and Alex Northrup, producer, songwriter as well, Jake Walsh, city art director and musician in Big Nobody. Thank you all for being here. R.I.P. Brian Wilson, and thank you for listening to member-supported public radio.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.